Welcome to the Waterloo Willington Children's Groundwater Festival.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Day 2 of the Waterloo Wellington Children's Groundwater Festival. Now, even though we are together from a distance, we are so glad you could make it here. For the next 60 minutes, we have a lot of information to share, and today's event is being recorded, and registered attendees will receive an email with the link in the coming days. Now, I'd like to start today, though, by inviting Michael to share the land acknowledgement. Michael, if you would.
Thanks, Kevin, and good morning. And good morning to all of you. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge and recognize that the water and the land that we'll be talking about in Wellington and Waterloo is the traditional home of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe people. For thousands of years before European settlers came, these indigenous groups took care of the water and took care of the land and made sure that all living things had a safe place to live and thrive. Now these groups, the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe people, they're not gone. They're still here, and they hold traditional knowledge that can help us make sure that our environment is safe for years to come. I encourage all of you to ask questions and learn about indigeneity. Working together is always the best way forward. Now, let's begin. Back to you, Kevin.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. Now, do you have questions about water? Now, some of our friends had their questions already answered. Let's listen in.
We asked them some water-related questions. What is your favorite water activity?
My favorite water activity is swimming. As a child, I went to a summer camp and learned how to swim, and then I learned how to take all of my awards to be a lifeguard. So during the summer and during school and high school, I taught swimming and I lifeguarded.
My favorite water activity would have to be water skiing. Love water skiing up in the Muskokas, as long as it's a little bit later in the year and the water's not too cold.
My favorite water activity would be kneeboarding. I love to go kneeboarding back in the day. I haven't done it in a long time, but I really liked kneeboarding.
What do you do to protect groundwater?
Well, what we do at our house is if you have vitamins or maybe a prescription and either you write down to the end of it or they're no longer valid or they're not effective, we do not flush pills and prescriptions down the toilet because that goes back into our water system. We take all of those drugs to the pharmacy and our pharmacist disposes of them in a safe manner. And it's a very, very important lesson to learn. Anything you flush down the toilet can and may end up in our water system.
What do I do to protect groundwater? Well, in my job, I work hard to encourage the province of Ontario to make water needs in municipalities like Centre Wellington, like the County of Wellington, more important than commercial water taking needs.
Well, as the mayor, myself and city councilors, we are always doing the best that we can for our water quality and our water quantity and to make sure that it is clean. We have an obligation for that, for usage at residents' homes and for businesses. And so it's highly important to me that we make sure that we adhere to that.
Well, today we're talking about soils, rocks, and groundwater. And we're going to be rock detectives. We'll also find out how water interacts with soil and learn all about groundwater. And if you have a question, make sure you share it in the chat. And we have a team of water experts standing by to answer your questions. When using the chat, it's important that we are respectful and only share questions and comments about water and what we're learning today. And I have friends in the chat room, and if necessary, they can remove comments or even put you in a timeout. But I know that won't even be necessary because you are kind and respectful folks. Now, We're also using slow mode today, and that means information typed into the chat will be delayed. So please be patient with us answering your questions. Now, have you ever wanted to be a rock detective? Now is your chance. We're heading over to the University of Waterloo to learn about rocks and how to identify them. And then we're going on a field trip to find out how water interacts with rocks.
Hello everyone, my name is Oliver.
And I'm Karina.
And we are going to be exploring rocks today. Rocks are all around us. They are in mountains, on the ground, or even in riverbeds.
And every rock tells its own story about how it's formed. But what is a rock?
All rocks are made up of these tiny little bits called minerals. And a way of thinking about it is with Lego. Each individual Lego piece is different from each other, just like minerals are. And as soon as we put them together, we get a masterpiece made out of Lego. But minerals and rocks are kind of the same thing. Minerals are each different from each other, but as soon as they start getting put together, they create a rock masterpiece. Simply put, a rock is made of a bunch of minerals.
Okay, so we figured out that rocks are made of minerals. But why are there so many rocks that look so different, like these two?
This is a great question, and there are actually two main reasons why rocks are so different from each other. The first reason is that rocks are made of one or many different minerals, so they are not always made of the same thing. And number two is that Earth's processes, like heat, movement, wind, and water, are constantly changing rocks over long periods of time. But the great thing is that scientists have actually organized the rocks into three main groups.
Well, thanks, Oliver. That does make things easier. But now I've thought of another question. Does anyone know the names of the three rock groups?
If you said igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary, you got it. Each group is based on how the rock forms on Earth.
So igneous rocks form when hot magma and lava start to cool and form solid rock. These rocks are commonly found on the sides of volcanoes. Igneous rocks often look rough and have holes in them because gas bubbles that were from the lava got stuck inside as the rock was cooling. You can see the holes inside of this rock here. This is an igneous basalt. Other igneous rocks form when magma cools slowly inside the Earth's crust. Because the magma's cooling slowly, minerals have time to grow large. So we can actually see these minerals with our eyes, just like we can see in this igneous granite.
Metamorphic rocks are rocks that have been changed. They change from heat or pressure, or maybe even both. The heat and pressure causes the rock to be bent up and down or squished together. And we can tell a rock has been changed because they'll normally have these zigzags or squiggly lines in them.
And last, sedimentary rocks form when little bits of rock from larger rocks gather and then get pressed together. Rivers, streams, glaciers, and rain can move little bits of rock. Over time, these little pieces of rock gather together in places like beaches, and then they get covered with other rocks, and then they get squished and pressed together to form a sedimentary rock, just like this sandstone.
Now that we've talked about the three rock groups, let's go outside, check out some real rocks, and be rock detectives. Hello everyone, I am at the Earth Science Museum's Peter Russell Rock Garden. Here, there are over 80 different rocks from all across North America. so it is the perfect place to be a rock detective. Let's go find our first rock. Let's get a closer look at this rock. If we look really close, it has different minerals that are red, white, and black. And the minerals are large enough to see with our eyes. What rock group is this part of? It is an igneous rock. The fancy name for this igneous rock is called granite. Let's go look at another rock. Let's take a closer look at this rock. This rock has all these squiggly lines on it that make it look like it's been bent or squished together. What kind of rock do you think this is? It is a metamorphic rock. The fancy name for this metamorphic rock is called marble. Let's go look at another rock. Let's take a closer look at this rock. As you can see, there are all these small holes on it that make it look like there were bubbles inside it as it formed. And if we were to pick it up, we'll notice that it's actually super light. What kind of rock do you think this is? And this is a bit of a tricky one because we've actually already guessed this rock before. This is an igneous rock. The fancy name for this igneous rock is called basalt. Let's go look at our last rock. Our last rock is this big rock here. What do you see? Looking close, it kind of looks like there's a bunch of rocks inside this big rock. And it kind of looks like the different rocks and pebbles were just glued together. So what kind of rock do you think this is? Yes, it is a sedimentary rock. And the fancy name for this sedimentary rock is called a conglomerate. I hope you've enjoyed being rock detectives with us today. Our challenge for you is to try and go out there and find what rocks you can find in your own neighborhood. Now get out there and get searching.
Hello again, friends. We just learned that rocks are made of minerals and that there are 3 different rock groups. But does water affect rocks? This is a water festival after all. The short answer is yes. Of course water affects rocks. Let's look at a few places where we can see how water is affecting rocks in some way.
This is the Laura Gorge. Water and ice carved out this channel long ago and continues to do so today. If you've never been to a Laura Gorge, I highly recommend you come and visit with your family. It's a great place to explore. This is the Grand River. Along the edge of the river, you can see and pick up rocks that have been carried down from upstream. You'll also notice that these river rocks have been smoothed by the water flowing over them for generations.
And this is a sandy beach, a gathering place for all of the tiny bits of rock. The rocks in all of these spots were shaped, moved, or brought together by water. That's right, water has power. Water has the power to break rocks apart. When rocks break apart, we call that weathering. Weathering is different from the weather outside. Weathering is when rocks break into smaller pieces.
A good example of this is when water gets into cracks in rock and breaks them apart when water freezes in the wintertime. Just like you can see here in these large and small cracks in the rock face.
Water also moves smaller rocks from one location to another. When water moves rocks, we call this erosion. And this is a great place to see erosion happening, especially in the spring when there's lots of snow melting and the water level in the river is high.
When there's lots of water moving down the Grand River, it flows along the edges of the banks, picks up rocks, picks up soil, picks up little pieces of gravel, and carries it downstream in the Grand River. Eventually, all of those little rocks end up somewhere. And when water moves rocks to a new location, like a beach, we call this deposition. Let's go see Oliver and do a little experiment to see weathering, erosion, and deposition in action.
Let's do a quick experiment to see weathering, erosion, and deposition in action. For this experiment, I'm using a cookie tray, some damp sand and gravel, this plastic container, but you can also use something like a thick book. I also have a jar of water, a watering can, and some towels. I place the container underneath one side of the pan, and then at the bottom of the pan, I place some towels to catch any possible runaway water. Then I built up some land here at the top of the tray with the sand and gravel. Then I created this river through the land from top to bottom. The next step is to then grab your watering can and then just pour a little bit of water at the top of the land. Watch how the water flows down the land following the riverbed. Do you see how the water is breaking down our riverbanks? Remember, this is an example of weathering, because weathering breaks down rocks. Also notice that the water is carrying these little pieces of sand with it as it flows. This is a great example of erosion. Remember, erosion moves the rocks. You may also notice that at the start of our experiment, there was no water or sand at the bottom of our tray here. What do you see at the bottom of our tray now? All of this was carried down our tray and was deposited here at the bottom. This is an example of deposition. So let's repeat those processes. Weathering breaks down the rocks, erosion moves the rocks, and then deposition drops the rocks in a new place.
Thanks, Oliver, that was great. So the next time you're out in nature looking at some rocks, think about how water might have affected them. Did weathering break them? Did erosion move them? Or did deposition cause them to come together? I hope you can go out and have some fun.
Knowing about rocks and soils can help us better understand groundwater. And did you know that groundwater is our drinking water? But where can we find groundwater? First, we're going to hear right from the source, groundwater that is, and then over to Karina to explain where we can find groundwater.
Hi, it's me, Groundwater, your drinking water. When you turn on a tap, do you ever wonder how I get there? It's a bit of a journey with help along the way to make sure I'm clean and safe for you to drink. My journey starts as rain or melted snow that soaks into the ground. Deep underground, you can find me, moving ever so slowly through the tiny spaces in an aquifer. For me to get where you are, a pipe or well is put into the ground. The region of Waterloo has over 100 wells throughout Waterloo region that provide the water you drink. After I enter a well, a pump gives me a push up to the top. I am cleaned and tested, and then off I go through underground pipes to your home. I am Groundwater, and I'm worth protecting.
Hello everyone, my name is Karina McDonald. I work at the University of Waterloo's Earth Sciences Museum. Did you know that depending on where you live, some or all of your drinking water comes from groundwater? Groundwater forms when rain or snowmelt seeps through the ground, like soil, sand, gravel, or rock, and is held in those spaces in the ground. I have some gravel here in front of me. If I hold it, as if it's really compressed underground, you can still see that there are spaces between the gravel That is where the water is stored and where the water can flow through. Here's an example. I've got soil here in my garden. Underneath the soil, there's gravel, just like the stuff I'm sitting on. I have a container here full of the same stuff. I'll just take off the lid. I've got soil in the top and gravel in the bottom. See? Let's take a closer look. When it rains, the water moves through the soil spaces and is then stored in spaces between the gravel. All of the water underground stored in those spaces is what we call groundwater. You have it, groundwater.
Have you ever wanted your own groundwater aquifer? Well, Jessica is going to show us how to make one.
When we look at water in the environment, we can see rivers, lakes, and ponds. But what about groundwater? Groundwater is invisible because it is water that exists beneath the ground. Today, we will be learning how to make a groundwater model at home or in the classroom so we can represent what groundwater looks like. This will show us how a groundwater system works and how we use wells to collect groundwater. For this activity, you will need a container with clear sides, 2 cups, some water, food coloring, gravel, a syringe or soap pump, a rubber band, nylon, and some tubing. First, take your container and fill it with some gravel. This represents the earth we live on. Then, add some food coloring to a cup of water. I chose blue to represent water. Pour this into the gravel. Notice how the water fills the spaces between the gravel? This represents groundwater. The line at the top of the water represents the water table. Air fills the spaces between the gravel above the water table, while water fills the spaces between the gravel below the water table. If we move our gravel to one side, we see that we have created surface water where there is no gravel above the water table. This could be a river, pond, or lake. When it rains over the groundwater and surface water level increases or recharges. Sometimes rivers, lakes, and ponds can become contaminated by nutrients, oil and gas, or bacteria. That's why we build wells to pull up groundwater that is less easily contaminated. To build a well, a pipe must be installed through the ground to reach the groundwater. A screen needs to be installed at the end of the pipe to make sure small pieces of sand and dirt do not enter the pipe. This nylon can be attached to the pipe with a rubber band and represents the screen that keeps the water we pull up clean. Place your pipe close to one side of your container so that you can see it enter below the water table. Then attach it to a syringe. The syringe represents the pump that helps pull the groundwater up through the ground. Then we can place it into an extra cup. This would be considered a high-capacity well because the syringe is able to pull a large volume of groundwater up quickly. This would represent wells that pull up groundwater by the city or businesses that need lots of water. We can also use a soap pump to pull up the groundwater. Since there is less water being pulled up, this would be considered a low-capacity well. This would represent wells that you may find on a family's property. Groundwater may be invisible to us, but we can use wells to draw water out of the ground for drinking, bathing, playing, watering plants on farms, and cooling down machines.
Well, thanks, Jessica. We can find groundwater underground in the spaces between sand and rocks. But how does groundwater move? Well, let's find out.
Hi, I'm Riley, and I'm going to show you how groundwater moves. If you look at our Earth, most of the water on our planet is in the oceans, and we cannot drink this because it is too salty. A lot of the fresh water, which is not too salty, is frozen in glaciers and in ice caps. We all need liquid fresh water to survive, and there is actually more of this underground than there is in lakes or rivers. This underground water is called groundwater. But groundwater is not usually found in underground lakes or underground rivers. Groundwater exists in tiny spaces between earth materials like sand and gravel. Together, all of those tiny spaces add up to a lot of water. Water flows into these tiny spaces in the ground from lakes, rivers, and rain. Some materials in the ground let water enter quickly, but others do not. In these 4 tubes, we have 4 different earth materials that can be found underground.
Gravel is large pieces of broken up rock. Sand is small pieces of broken up rock. Limestone is a type of solid rock, but it often has cracks in it, so it is a type of fractured bedrock. Clay is tiny pieces of rock. It is like sand, but the pieces are so tiny that we cannot see each one. And these tiny pieces of rock are usually a different shape than in sand. We will see why this matters.
Each of these tubes has an empty space in both ends, and there is also water inside. So when I flip the tubes over, we will see how fast water flows through the earth material to the other end. Before I flip these tubes over, I want all of us to think about each of these earth materials and the spaces between them and decide which earth material we expect will let water flow through it the fastest. And we can have a vote. So if you are in a classroom, this is a great time for a teacher to count student votes and write them on a board. Okay, let's go.
If you think that water will flow through gravel the fastest, then raise your hand. If you think that water will flow through sand the fastest, then raise your hand. If you think that water will flow through this fractured bedrock, limestone, the fastest, then raise your hand. If you think that water will flow through clay the fastest, then raise your hand. Now that we have guessed which earth material will let water flow through it the fastest, let's find out. Which earth material did water flow through the fastest? Let's watch that again. In the sand and the gravel, there are lots of connected spaces that let the water flow through quickly. Even though the limestone is a solid rock, water can flow quickly through the cracks. In the clay, there are still lots of tiny spaces that could hold water, but they are not all connected because the pieces of clay have very thin shapes that pack very tightly together. It will take a very long time for water to move through the clay. In these tubes, gravel and fractured bedrock were the earth materials that let water flow through the fastest. The sand also let the water flow through, but it was not quite as fast. We did not see any water flow through the clay.
To use groundwater for our everyday needs, like filling our drinking bottles, we need to find areas with lots of sand, gravel, or fractured bedrock in the ground. Those earth materials can store a lot of groundwater, wells can easily pull groundwater out of them, and water can quickly flow into them to refill the groundwater supply from lakes, rivers, and rain. If there's a lot of clay in the ground, then it is harder to pull groundwater out, and it will take much more time for the groundwater supply to be refilled. Thank you for watching.
Well, we now know groundwater is underground and that it slowly moves through the spaces between sand and rocks. We also know groundwater is our drinking water. But how do we get it from deep underground to where we live? Well, time to find out.
Hi everyone, my name's Danielle, and today I'm going to talk to you about how to construct a well. What do you think of when you hear the word well? How you did on your last math test? A deep cobblestone well you need to watch out for so you don't fall into? Or maybe a wishing well that can grant you all that you desire? Well, wells come in many shapes and forms. There are monitoring wells that help us understand how much groundwater we have and how clean the groundwater is. Some of you might even have a well in your backyard that provides you with drinking water. Wells can either be drilled or dug, and they can either be shallow or deep. Municipal wells are the wells many of our towns and cities, like Guelph and Waterloo, rely on for water. There are even oil wells. Although, since this is the Children's Groundwater Festival and not Oil Festival, we will be focusing on the groundwater wells. So, how do we construct a well? A simple drilled monitoring well has three main parts. A screen, which is basically a perforated pipe, so a pipe with tiny holes to let water flow into the well and keep all the big pieces of sand or rock out of it, like a filter, and a riser or casing of solid pipe going up to the surface. The riser or casing supports the sides of the wells and keeps dirt from filling in the hole. The part of the well above the ground is called the stick-up. Wells come in different sizes in both how deep they go into the ground and how big around the pipes are, and they can be made of different materials such as steel, plastic, or concrete. But we also need to think about the types of materials in the ground and around the well. Remember how you learned that some soils, such as sand, allow for groundwater to flow more easily than soils such as clay, which are more impermeable? Well, to keep the hole from filling in and allow the groundwater to flow into the well, the area around the bottom of the well is surrounded with sand. We also want to make sure that there isn't a gap between the well pipe and the drilled hole that can allow anything from the surface to get into the aquifer. To make sure that the groundwater in the aquifer stays nice and clean, a seal or plug is used to stop water from flowing directly down the sides of the well. Now, many of you might be saying, Danielle, how do we know how deep the well should go? Well, first, we need to figure out what the types of soil are in the area. We can do that by drilling and examining the soil, and I'm going to show you a video of that next. We can also look at maps and do a little bit of background research. Most of the wells in Ontario are mapped, and their records are available to anyone who is interested. Each of these little blue dots is a well in the Guelph area, for example. Each dot includes information about well depth, types of soil, and groundwater level. Now for the fun part. Here we're seeing a drill rig in action, lifting a 20-inch casing segment for the installation of a municipal production well. The photo on the left shows an actual well drilling truck and how big they really are. How high do you think that goes up in the air? Take a guess. Now, do you remember when we talked about how are we supposed to know how deep the well should go? And in order to figure that out, we needed to do some drilling and look at the soil in the area. Well, that's what these are. These are called core samples, and core samples reveal the physical and chemical nature of the rock, and they're basically just big tubes of rock. So another question you might have is, well, how do I decide where to install my well? We install water supply wells in aquifers. They do best in the ground layer that is typically made of sand and gravel, the area where water flows easily through it. And you can see on the diagram here, the two big blue areas are the aquifer. Sometimes, though, wells are installed in bedrock, such as limestone or shale, where there are many fractures through which groundwater flows. Now, once the well is installed, a pump is inserted to help pull the water up. And as you can see by this diagram, there are so many different wells and options of how and where to install them. It all depends on what the purpose of the well is. What will it be used for? And what are the soil conditions in which they are installed? Well, that's it for me. Thanks for hanging out with me, guys. Enjoy the rest of the festival.
There certainly are a lot of new words that I've learned today about groundwater. How about you? Well, maybe we should review some of them.
Groundwater. Groundwater is the rain or melted snow that soaks into the ground, moving ever so slowly through the spaces between the sand grains, rocks, or gravel. Aquifer. This is where you can find groundwater. An aquifer is made up of layers of different materials such as sand, gravel, bedrock, and clay. Recharge. Also called infiltration or percolation, recharge happens when water from the rain or melted snow soaks into the aquifer. Water table. The area underground where you first find water when you dig a hole. Unsaturated zone. The area above the water table where the sand, rock, or gravel isn't filled with water. Saturated zone. The area below the water table where the spaces in the sand grains, rocks, or gravel are filled with water. Well, a large pipe placed in a hole dug or drilled into the ground to collect groundwater from an aquifer. Distribution system. Many pipes under the surface of the ground that help move the groundwater from the well to your home.
Taking care of the groundwater we use for drinking is really important and something you can help with. Now, Harmeet is going to explain a bit more.
So I'm sure a lot of you guys know about conserving water. What are some ways do you think that at your house you can conserve water? Shout it out loud. I'm sure a lot of you guys are going to be saying taking shorter showers, only flushing your toilet when you need to, and to turn off the tap when you brush your teeth. These are all some very, very great ways of conserving water. However, protecting our water and making sure our water is clean is actually just as important. As if our water is polluted, we won't have any water to drink, we won't have water to shower with, we won't have water to clean the dishes. So we need to make sure our water is clean. And a good way of getting clean water is by using groundwater. So groundwater is, well, the water under the ground. It's between layers of sand, rock, and dirt, and this layer is called an aquifer. Here we have a layout of the area under the ground. So we start actually on top of the ground where we live. That's represented by the grass. And then we have the dirt, topsoil. So when you dig into the ground, let's say you dig in your backyard, the first thing you'll reach is the dirt, is the topsoil. And then after that, we reach the aquifer. The aquifer can sometimes be only 2 or 3, 4 feet under the ground, but sometimes it can reach lengths of 80 feet, which can be it's around the size of a water tower. The aquifer is what holds the groundwater, which is the water that we end up drinking. Actually, 80% of the people who live in the Waterloo region drinks from the groundwater. And from the Wellington and Guelph areas, 100% drink from the groundwater. So we want to make sure it's clean. We don't want to put anything in there that end up making the water dirty or will contaminate it. So a good way to think about this is anything that you wouldn't put in this cup, that you're in this water that you'll drink, you shouldn't be putting on the ground, shouldn't be putting on your roads, on your yard, because this will end up seeping into the groundwater. It'll end up flowing into the groundwater through the dirt. Some examples of some things that some people end up putting in the ground on the ground that ends up in the groundwater is oils. Sometimes people use salt for when they melt the ice, and another great example is pesticides. So we want to make sure we avoid using these materials so that our water ends up being very clean so that we can drink it. Now we're going to do an activity. In this activity, we're going to be taking on the part of a cleaner, someone who's trying to clean our groundwater after, let's say, an oil spill. So when an oil spill happens, all the oil will end up seeping into our groundwater and contaminating it. And here we have 2 orange balls, and these are going to represent the oil. The 2 white balls are going to represent the clean water. So we're going to put it into the groundwater. And now we're going to try to uncontaminate the groundwater. We're going to try to take out the oil balls. But we have a lid covering it here, because this kind of represents us going in blind. Since when someone tries to uncontaminate groundwater, they are kind of going in blind. As it's so deep below the surface, they can't see anything, which makes it so difficult to get the actual oil, to get the contaminated material. So when I reach in, I'm reaching in for the oil, I'm trying to get the contaminants, and if we pull one out, it was clean water. As I'm not looking into it, so I can't really see what I'm going to get, and this represents what will happen when our actual workers, the people who work for the city, try to uncontaminate the water. So this is why we need to remember to not put anything on the ground, on our lawns, on our roads, that will end up contaminating the groundwater. Finally, I'd like to show you a road sign. Have you seen this sign? This sign can be found along the side of roads. It is a reminder we are in an area where you can find groundwater, our drinking water, and that we all have a role to play to protect it.
Thanks very much, Harmeet. Now, it's time to use our imagination and pretend it's winter. Now, you put on your boots, your hat, your winter coat, but what does that have to do with groundwater? Well, we're going to hear from Groundwater and then over to Alexis to tell us more.
Hi, it's me, Groundwater, your drinking water. Did you know the salt and ice melter, including environmentally friendly products, put on the ground to keep you safe can be harmful to me? After the salt has done its job, it doesn't go away. It can soak into the ground and mix with me. Over time, all this salt can make me taste salty. I am groundwater, and I'm worth protecting.
Stop! What are you doing?
I'm using salt to melt the snow. Why? What's the problem?
You do know pouring this much salt on the ground is bad for water, right?
I don't see any water.
What if I told you there's water all around us? We just can't see it.
What? There is? Where's all this water?
Deep underground below our feet. It's called groundwater. It's the rain and the melted snow that soaks into the ground. This groundwater is our drinking water, so it's very important that we keep it clean.
But we're up here, and the groundwater is deep underground. How is me putting salt on the ground a problem?
The salt you put on the ground doesn't go away. The salt mixes with the rain and the melted snow and soaks into the ground until it reaches the groundwater. All this salt can make the groundwater taste salty.
But what should I do? I need to clear the snow so that it's safe to walk on the sidewalk, but I also want to keep the groundwater clean.
Here you go. Shovel the snow. Shoveling the snow before it packs down into ice means little or no salt on the ground. Next, use this ice chopper to break up any big pieces of ice. Finally, on any icy spots, spread some sand for traction or sprinkle just the tiniest of salt. A small amount of salt goes a long way. In fact, just a few tablespoons of salt is all you need for one sidewalk slab. You may not see it instantly, but the salt is working. It just needs time. You might be tempted to add more salt, but don't. Instead, Go have some fun and play in the snow and give the salt the time it needs to do its job. Hey, that's great! You're doing your part to keep groundwater clean. Thanks! Next up, the driveway.
Oh, I think it's your turn.
Oh, bother.
Do you help shovel the snow? It's actually one way that you can help keep groundwater clean. Well, before we finish today, let's play a game of Guess the Picture. I'll give you a clue. These are pictures of what we've learned today.
Hey everyone, it's time to play Guess the Picture. As a picture reveals itself, see if you can guess what it is. For the answer, watch the letters for the words slowly appear. Ready? Here we go. Do you know what this is a picture of? It's the Grand River. Okay, time for our next picture. See if you can guess what it is. Did you guess rocks? Today we learned how to be rock detectives. Now for the next picture. See if you can guess what it is. This is groundwater. It's the water we drink. What's this picture of? Any ideas? This is a shovel. Shoveling the snow means less salt that is harmful to groundwater. And now for the last picture. What do you think this is? This is a well. We use wells to collect the groundwater we drink. Thanks for playing.
Were you able to guess the pictures? Well, thank you for joining us today at the Waterloo Wellington Children's Groundwater Festival. And a reminder, today's event was recorded, and a link will be emailed to all registered attendees. Now, if you can, join us again tomorrow at 10 a.m. to learn about habitats and communities. And we're going to end our time together today with a song from Sean. But first, I want to tell you about a Kahoot quiz you can play that covers everything we learned today. Details are included in the chat, so make sure you try it out. And now, for a song on what to do when it's raining. Bye for now, folks.
The weatherman said you better stay in bed. It's another gray, rainy day. Everyone to spare, there's water in the air. It's gonna wash your smiles away. All the plans you made will have to be delayed because of this H2O. Everyone hide, you have to stay inside. There's nowhere you can go. 'Cause it's raining, it's pouring, puddles are forming. It's raining, it's pouring, go do something boring. Well, the stuff we need to live is falling from the sky. No time to celebrate, hang your heads and cry. Farmers might say that showers are a blessing, but we've been told that rain should be depressing. So shut down all the playgrounds, close the summer camps. Imagine what would happen if the children got damp. Hide out in your houses, hide out in your cars. If you want to find some water, go look for it on Mars. Cause parents all know, and you should not forget, the worst thing that can happen is if something gets wet. It's raining, it's pouring, puddles are forming. It's raining, it's pouring, go do something boring. Well, the weatherman said you better stay in bed. It's raining, it's pouring, puddles are forming. It's raining, it's pouring, go do something boring. It's raining.